of that. That's just a leftover little piece from last time. The main subject for this time is the almost free spirits, and they include, and this is what's interesting, Jesus, and they would include Markel. And that begins to bring me to the similarities between Nietzsche and Dostoevsky on the one hand, and then the second half of the lecture we'll get to the big differences between Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, and that's where I want to sort of compare the various views of life that are being proposed by Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, and Dostoevsky. And finally, after that, if there's time today, and if not, that's fine, on Tuesday, I want to hear your views about, or take a vote at least, about which way of life is the one that you find convincing, if any. But it takes a while, so let's go. So we got Nietzsche's Jesus. I told you to bring the Antichrist and the Twilights of the Idols, so we're on 152. And that is, he says, at the beginning, in aphorism 29, what I am concerned with is the psychological type of the Redeemer. And we don't know yet what that means. And it starts out looking rather bad for the Redeemer from Kierkegaard's, from Nietzsche's point of view. That is, he says, where does he say it? Or 155. He says it in about 5 lines down. One has to regret that no Dostoevsky lived in the neighborhood of this most interesting decadent. That's Jesus. I mean someone who could feel the thrilling fascination of such a combination of the sublime, the sick, and the childish. That should, if those of you who read The Idiot, and I remember there were very few, that sounds like a very quick summary of the view of Jesus as the idiot in The Idiot, and that suggests that maybe Dostoevsky read it. Nietzsche read it. People think that if Nietzsche has read any of the Dostoevsky novels, that would be the one he's read. And it also could remind you of Markel, who is sublime and sick and childish, but is saying these wonderful revealing of God and connectedness and love pronouncements. But he is a decadent, so we have to understand what's that. He's not like a Socrates decadent. That's the next thing to say. I mean, Socrates was really decadent. I mean, his instincts were all in total chaos, and he wanted to die, and he was against the body and against life and so forth. That's the picture that comes down of Socrates through Plato. That's not at all like Jesus. And now comes one of the most surprising lines in the book on 156. After all the ranting against Christianity, about 15 lines from the bottom, one could with some freedom of expression call Jesus a free spirit. And now why would you do that? Well, he has certain things in common with Nietzsche as free spirit. He cares nothing for what is fixed. That's good. He's not, according to Dostoevsky, in the eternity business. He's in the constant overcoming. The word killeth, everything fixed killeth. He's putting his version or his spin on it. The concept, the experience, life, in the only form he knows it, is opposed to any kind of word, formula, law, faith, dogma. Remember, Jesus says he comes to fulfill the law. He doesn't have to obey the law anymore. He goes on the Sabbath and cures people. You're not supposed to do that. But and Nietzsche's got something right there. Remember, way back I said that's where your feeling, your desire, your joy or non-joy is the test of whether you're a good person or not whether you obey the law or not. And that makes Jesus, if you cut it up that way, sound like Nietzsche. And he wants to, but if you're going to say that, then you've got to distinguish Nietzsche from the Christians, what they made of Nietzsche. And that's on 154. No, it isn't. That's still... Why am I saying that? Just a second. I'm saying get ready for the fact that he's going to be telling you about Jesus for a minute, but then he's going to tell you, of course, that the Christians immediately lost it. But this is still what makes Jesus look like a free spirit on 154. He says, aphorism 31, I have anticipated my answer to the problem, that is the problem of Jesus. Its presupposition is that the type of the Redeemer has been preserved to us only in a very distorted form. So he's picturing his own view of what Jesus was doing and saying, and then he's telling you, is that not what Paul, particularly he hates Paul, turned it into? But let's go on with what he thinks it is. He again goes back to Dostoevsky at the bottom of 154, that strange and sick world to which the Gospels introduces us, a world like that of the Russian novel, in which refuse of society, neurosis, and childlike idiocy seem to have a rendezvous, must in any case have coarsened the type. The first disciples in particular had to translate a being immensely immersed entirely in symbols and incomprehensibilities. That's complicated. That says that Jesus was talking in parables. Jesus was bringing in such a new world, that being a super free spirit, he's opening up a whole new world. I mean, there was the ancient world, there was the Hebrew world, pretty soon there's going to be the Christian world, but the Christian world isn't here yet, so at that point. So Jesus has to talk in parables and symbols, and these are incomprehensible, naturally, to the disciples who still have only the old vocabulary and only the Hebrew world to make sense of this, which can't make sense of this. So obviously they're going to get it wrong. So Nietzsche's got an argument, which is an interesting argument, that it must be distorted, what you're going to read in Paul and in the Gospels. They couldn't understand it. And every once in a while you see in the Gospels Jesus says things and the disciples say things, and you can see Jesus is exasperated because the disciples haven't understood anything. And that's because, Jesus sounds to them crazy, just as Markle sounds to everybody crazy. Remember, Markle is the Jesus figure in the book, childlike, sick with tuberculosis, brain fever, and saying utterly incomprehensible things, or pretty incomprehensible, not really, because 2,000 years of Christianity have made them comprehensible, but saying the servants should wash the feet of their masters, and saying we should love everything and everybody, even the birds. I don't think even Jesus said we should love the birds. St. Francis said it, and Markle says it. So let me go a little further, the bottom of 154. So they translate these incomprehensibilities into their own crudity in order to understand anything at all. For them, such a type could not exist until it had been reduced to more familiar terms. That's all exactly what I'm saying, and Nietzsche's absolutely right. That's bound to be a problem. But Jesus, you can glimmer through their incomprehension that Jesus is, as I said, against fixed moral laws. That was the bottom of 156. And a belief in, and then now look at the middle of 157. He thinks that the Christians soon thought Jesus was talking about denial, about denying your sensuous side, your body, your impulses, the sins in your members, as Paul would put it, and so forth. But he wasn't, according to Nietzsche. He says denial is precisely what is totally impossible for him. Dialectics are likewise lacking, so he's not going around making arguments like Socrates. The idea is lacking that a faith, a truth, could be proved by reasons. That's what Socrates thinks. That's what, according to my son, Buddhist thinks. Buddhists, at least his kind of Tibetan Buddhist, I get constantly bombarded with arguments that are supposed to convince me that the Buddhist way of looking at things is true. That's not Jesus'. His proofs are inner lights, inner feelings of pleasure, self-affirmations, nothing but proofs by potency. That is very Nietzschean. He thinks that Jesus thinks sort of power and joy is evidence that he's on the right track. In effect, he's saying what Markle says. When Markle says that we're in paradise here and now if we would only see it, that is exactly what Nietzsche's attributing to Jesus. If you look on 158 now, at the end of number 33, the profound instinct of how one would have to live in order to feel oneself in heaven, to feel oneself eternal, while in another condition, one by no means feels oneself in heaven. This alone is the psychological reality of redemption, a new way of living, not a new belief. Well, that's complicated, but what that says is, like Markle, if you feel that you're in heaven here and now, that is, as Markle puts it, if you're in paradise here and now, if you'd only see it, then you are in paradise. And that's what Jesus was defending, not some other world, but the world, a way of living in this world that turns it into paradise and heaven here and now. In other words, it's all gotten existentialized by Nietzsche. So one more on 159. So he's going to talk about the notion of the Father and the Son. So he says, I grant, about 5 lines down, in the word Son is expressed the entry into the collective feeling of the transfiguration of all things. In that sense, Markle is like Jesus, who is the Son, not S-O-N, but S-U-N. But remember, the idea is that Markle and Jesus manifest this new way of life, this loving way of life, and it enters the world that way. The connectedness enters the world. So in the word Father, this feeling itself, the feeling of perfection and eternity, I'm ashamed to recall what the church has made of this symbolism. So he's happy, Nietzsche, with some feeling of, if not an ocean of love quite, but some feeling of happiness here and now, power outside of the law, and so forth. And suffering doesn't play any role in his reconstruction of all this. So for them to get it right, so we have to get it right. Nietzsche is going to fix it by existentializing it. But here's the next question. But why is then he called a decadent? So far, it looks like everything about him is the whole right. The top of 163. I resume. I shall now relate the real history of Christianity. The word Christianity is already a misunderstanding. In reality, there has been only one Christian, and he died on the cross. So we're talking about the one Christian who was a free spirit, but it all got changed. But back to, so what happened there? That his dying on the cross was already a sign that, well, no, I better say something else. That Nietzsche doesn't tell you right off. You have to figure it out. I want to know whether anybody can figure it out. Given all that description of Jesus, what did he do wrong? And it has to do with dying on the cross. Anybody know? Well, I think it's that he was meek. I mean, he should have fought back. He should have led a rebellion of freedom fighters. Maybe he was trying to lead a rebellion of freedom fighters, I think. But in any case, he didn't. He was meek. That was part of the problem. And he was compassionate. Now comes the real standoff between Nietzsche and all of the Christian view, even the very, very nearly right view that Jesus had. And the big issue is, what do you do with the people who are weak and don't have the power to have brief habits, to constantly overcome, to turn against the ethics, to open new worlds? What do you do with them? Well, clearly, in Dostoevsky, somebody like Alyosha helps them, tries to prop them up and get them as near to being, and get them in touch with the love. And never mind, if they're in touch with the love, they don't need any more strength than that. That'll do it. But Nietzsche, and now we have to look at 159, where you get a hint of this thing I'm telling you. It's not, I didn't make it up completely. And now we're at 35. This bringer of glad tidings, that's the Bible. I mean, Nietzsche thinks that the glad tidings that Jesus had got turned into bad tidings by the followers. But the bringer of glad tidings died as he lived. Why am I getting this? Died as he lived, as he taught, not to redeem mankind, but to demonstrate how one ought to live. What he bequeathed to mankind in his practice, his bearing before the judges, before the guards, before the accusers, and every kind of calamity and mockery, his bearing on the cross. Now comes the trouble starting. He does not resist. He does not defend his rights. He takes no steps to avert the worst that can happen to him. Now, that kind of nonviolence, that kind of pacifism, boy, is that not a Nietzschean virtue. I mean, that's not life. That's not overcoming. The best place to see more of it, starting at the bottom of 127. Try this on Jesus. What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man. What is bad? All that proceeds from weakness. What is happiness? The feeling that power increases, that a resistance is overcome. Now, then, not contentment, but more power. Not peace at all, but war. Not virtue, but proficiency. Virtue in the Renaissance style. The weak and ill-constituted. That's already sort of un-Jesus, un-Christian, but it gets extremer. The weak and ill-constructed shall perish, first principle of our philosophy, and one shall help them do so. I mean, that's getting really the opposite. I mean, so if you find weak people, the best thing you can do is sort of put them out of their misery. What is more harmful than vice? Active sympathy for the ill-constituted and weak. Christianity. Well, that little bit of Christianity is enough, I take it, to disqualify Jesus as a free spirit. Although he, except for that, he comes close. What gives you power is healthy because it's life. Life is constantly getting more powerful, overcoming what you were. He keeps talking like outgrowing, getting stronger, and that's all life. And Socrates' interest in truth doesn't give him power because it leaves him with this other world of truth. In this world, that he doesn't really he wishes he wasn't in this world, struggling, overcoming, and so forth.